Good morning, everyone. It's now 9:32. I'm going to call the meeting to order. In my opening remarks, I just want to thank all of the members who attended in October, beginning of October, for the scheduled meeting in which we did not meet quorum. Those of you that did attend, thank you. Also, thank you to Dawn for being fully willing to chair that meeting, although it was a very short one. And thank you especially to Jamie for coming with her little one unexpectedly to this meeting. And we understand that if you need to leave the horseshoe at any time, that's okay. So we need to approve the agenda that's in the package. It's the exact identical agenda as the October meeting, the first meeting in October that was canceled. So there's nothing been added except in the addeds, you'll see a delegation of Dr. Bray, who will want to speak to the committee regarding the report on designations. And so that would be under delegations. Hopefully he arrives in time. So you'll see, we need a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Paul, seconded by Dawn. Any suggestions on the printed agenda? Yes, Don.
Excuse me, I think the committee should have an opportunity to discuss the proposed changes in the grant bylaw, and I wonder if under other business you could add an item discussion of the proposed grants bylaw.
So there's, he's talking about briefing 7B, Heritage Grant Bylaw update. The information was in the package. The briefing is to talk about that. On briefings, committee members are permitted to ask questions, detailed questions. There's no limit on that. As far as an actionable item, the procedural reality is as follows. It's a council decision to make a change to the grant program, and that's, I presume, why there's no debatable item on the agenda related to this, unless there's one upcoming. Yeah, I guess Mr. Newman will give us a further explanation of the context of the briefing when the item comes up, but it wouldn't be appropriate to add an agenda item beyond its spot that it already has at 7B at this time, as I understand. Are there any other suggestions? Yes. Could you just turn on your mic and...
Would there be a chance to discuss it at that time?
I think at this point what we should do is wait till it comes up in the agenda, and Mr. Newman will introduce it, and all questions are in order. So the questions that you're asking me now really would be better addressed by him. Now he's not permitted to speak during the agenda setting. So a vote of the committee is not required on an item which is an information report or a briefing to the committee. Anything else? Okay, so we'll vote on the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Confirmation of minutes. So we have minutes from September 6th and then the special meeting on September 13th. Do we need two separate motions? Well, they'll be subject of one motion. Need a mover and seconder. Moved by Dawn, seconded by Councillor Schell. So two sets of minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, we will vote on both sets of minutes. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest? Yes, Don.
Not for me, but Matt Gervin said he'd be late to the meeting, and he has an item for which he is the agent.
Can he declare his pecuniary interest when he arrives? Okay, he was allowed to declare at that time. Anything else? No, seeing none. Presentations, no, but we do have a delegation, and here he comes just in time. This is Dr. Bray, and he's up next to speak to us regarding the designation bylaws in the package. Please, Dr. Bray, come right to microphone. You're right on time. We've just arrived to your item. Just up to the lectern here. And do you require any electronic, is there a PowerPoint or anything of that nature?
No, I think I'll be fine, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you have the floor and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes. I don't know whether any of you were at the KCVI 225th reunion a few weeks ago. I was able to go. I was performing there. One of the things that really came through to me was the strong associational values of that property, not just with the people who went there, but with the community at large. So in terms of designation, going back to the criteria under Regulation 906, it's more than just the building. All three categories are covered in terms of the evaluation. And I think it's important to think of it beyond architecture. Yes, it's important architecturally, but it's also important in terms of its association and also in terms of its contextual value as part of an institutional precinct embedded in the downtown. So those are things to consider. The other thing about designation is that, and I'm often asked this, and I'm sure you are too, it doesn't freeze things. It's a form of change management. It's a way of the community asserting their values and putting those in play for anything that might happen to the property in the future. One of the other things to consider about that property is that it's not just the school building. There's quite a bit of land around it. So the designation covers the entire property. And I think that's important too, because again, in terms of any kind of future development, there is an opportunity there that wouldn't necessarily directly affect the building. The other thing to remember about the building itself is it is an evolved structure. There are remnants of the 1890s building in the rear wing, and then you get progressive iterations in the 20th century, culminating in the 1968 wing. So you've got what we often find in heritage buildings, an evolved structure. Each era has a particular importance, and it tells an ongoing story of education in this community and also the way in which that building responded to the needs of the time. And so certainly I encourage you to foster the designation of KCVI. And some of you may know I was the parent representative during the so-called park process, which is what the school board ran at the time when surplusing school property was being discussed. So I'm well aware of all of the different issues involved. I'm also well aware of many of the details of the building itself and the property itself. So I'm not going to take more of your time, but certainly if you have questions about the property, I'm very happy to answer them. And again, thank you for your time. I encourage you to move this designation forward.
Thank you, Dr. Bray. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Yes, Don.
Just wondering whether you have concerns that the description of the heritage attributes are lacking anything? I mean, you've read them, I assume?
Well, I'm glad you raised that question. It's always a delicate balance when you're writing a statement of cultural heritage value or interest and listing heritage attributes. Certainly in an ideal world, I would have listed interior attributes, particularly the auditorium. Practically, often it's better to start with the exterior, make sure that that's part of the designation, and then depending on what types of development or redevelopment are planned for the property in the future, then the interior elements become components of it. As I say, in an ideal world, I would have included the auditorium. So at this stage, I think practically it's probably advisable not to, but I'll take your advisement.
Yes, Paul.
I'm very impressed that you actually acknowledge that there's more than just the building. There is the story behind the building and the use of it as a school and education. Coming to talk to us, are you concerned that story may be lost if it's not designated? Or it could, or are you concerned that it should stay within the education realm to tell that story?
Well, again, I'm glad you asked that question, because as a heritage consultant, not often, I have to be very careful to advise on the heritage values of a property, not on what might happen in terms of land use and the Planning Act. Certainly, I think I'm concerned about the future of that property, and quite rightly so. But I think it's important that the designation focus on what is of value, and I think its location as well as its physical form are very important, and they do meet the criteria for designation under Regulation 906. So yes, I'm certainly concerned about the future of it, and I think it's important that it remain in institutional use. The Heritage Act doesn't cover land use, though. So you're working within the Heritage Act now. I think designation will be a strong message to support institutional use as a continuing use on that property. So yes, it will have an effect, but the Heritage Act doesn't directly deal with that Planning Act aspect.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question on that aspect. So in the bylaw, so Schedule A on page 55, and this is a typical structure. You have an introduction, description of the property, a statement of cultural heritage value, interest, and then cultural heritage attributes, which are listed in point form. Is it ever appropriate to put cultural heritage attributes that are non-physical, such as the stories, the famous alumni, and things like that, in the cultural heritage attributes list? Or is it kind of moot because it's not a physical thing that needs to be listed?
Well, I think the 906 criteria are broad enough under the associational value category that yes, those are valid. I mean, the perhaps most obvious example of that would be some famous event happened here. Confederation started in this building, that kind of thing. But it is certainly valid to list those. And I'm trying to remember the wording. I don't have the bylaw in front of me, but whether you've got some description in the association of values, some of the famous people, for example, who have come from KCVI, some of the, again, some of the community associations, it would be important for the history of Kingston. So yes, it's a broad category, associational value, historical associational value, and yes, you can put things like that in it. The other, just to add to that, one of the other questions I've been asked in terms of the future of the building, what about things that aren't nailed down? Some of the memorabilia, some of the artifacts. The Heritage Act doesn't really give you a lot of guidance on those, and I think that's almost a separate conversation about how those are conserved. Where they're conserved, of course, but also in what way. And so designation of the property doesn't necessarily cover goods and chattels, if you will. And that's really an issue with the Act. So we're not going to solve that today, but I just wanted to alert you that designating the property doesn't necessarily conserve the plaques, the trophies, the pictures, all of those sorts of things. That's something else that has to be organized.
I guess the other way to ask the question is, if we go ahead and designate and council passes the bylaw, and this would apply to the internal contents, like the memorabilia, but also, I believe, to things like the auditorium, because in the heritage permit process for alterations, even though it's not listed in the heritage attributes in the bylaw, the Heritage Committee will consider the entire context of the story in the decision to grant a permit. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, the committee and staff and council would consider the property holistically. If it went to the Ontario Municipal Board and you were having to describe, you were having to focus on the attributes, there could be an issue. If someone wanted to completely gut the interior and just leave the facade, if the facade elements are the only things that are actually listed as attributes, you could be in a bit of hot water there. So yes, it's a tough decision. I mean, again, as I say, in an ideal world, I'd add the auditorium, but I think in practical terms, to make sure that you can avoid a potential objection, those sorts of things, I'd be tempted to leave it just with the exterior. But you're right, at the time of a development application, that's when you can weigh in on those matters.
Thank you. I see more questions. Paul, go to Sherman first and then come back to you. Sherman.
Thank you. Dr. Bray, good to see you. I just wondered if this is also an issue that is subject to some of the other designated properties, specifically religious sites, and that the site is very significant, but the physical matter, the attributes that the bylaw describes, may or may not actually convey the significance of the site so much. Mm-hmm. And can you suggest maybe that wording be added in the attribute somehow to phrase the significance of the site so that it can be considered as an attribute that may be a physical, how do you create that physical description of that?
Okay. Oh, great. Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, for example, to answer your question, under the first bullet point under cultural heritage attributes, scale, massing, and visual presence on Frontenac and Alfred Streets as part of an institutional precinct in the downtown core. That might be one way of addressing what you're just talking about. And I think, let me see, that's contextual value. That would be one way of addressing that, yes, without getting into a lot of detail. I'm just wondering whether I can ask my colleagues for some of their thoughts on it. I'm sure they've been thinking of it as well.
I was just conferring the clerk about procedure. Yes, you have one more question. Each member has 2 questions during a delegation.
Could you clarify, you mentioned about memorabilia, and I know that's not designated, but when does memorabilia such as a plaque or something become actually part of the building and not properties of the owner? So if it was designated and there's a plaque or something, can that be designated? Because right now the owners, I believe, would be the Limestone District School Board,
Yes.
or the Minister of Education. I'm not sure how that works, but
I don't know exactly. My feeling would be if it was actually a fresco, for example, integral to the wall, then it would be part of the building. If it's something that can be removed, and most plaques, I believe, can be detached from a wall surface, then it becomes a chattel and would be part of the disposition of all of the movable objects. So it wouldn't be part of the designation. That's my understanding of it. It's a gray area in the designation, in the legislation.
Any other questions for Dr. Bray? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And we will be dealing with that item later on in business. So that was delegations. Thank you. So now we're on briefings. There's two briefings. First, Dr. Campbell will speak to us regarding the Engage for Change #YGK reconciliation journey.
All right, thank you, and thank you all for being here on a Friday. And Isla, I think, has been fantastic so far, Jamie, so I don't think we have any worries about babies in the horseshoe. So when the briefing was supposed to come to you, it was going to be in advance of our final talking circle, and so I was going to take the opportunity. Oh. I don't want to
New computer.
legally bind myself to being James.
Yeah, it's a tough person to be.
All right, so when I was first going to come here, I was going to talk to you all about, hey, we've got a final talking circle, and it's the last opportunity for members of this group or others that you're in connection with in the community to think about how you can get involved in the Engage for Change project in this first phase of its iteration, and that was the 10 talking circles. Given that the time has now passed and that talking circle happened on Monday, I'm not in a position to kind of be here to sort of push your hand if you were able to attend, but I thought it was still appropriate to kind of give an update about where we are in this process. And I want to share the update because I think it's important that we recognize, particularly in a committee such as this one, about the ways that the kind of work we do begins in small movements and then starts to generate interest and to kind of move out across the community in some very powerful ways. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the ways that we're seeing the community engagement and momentum behind this grow, and some of the ways that we're already seeing in the feedback we've received through Engage for Change, thoughts about things that are going to come before this horseshoe in conversation about how do we work to kind of decolonize and continue to work with the Indigenous community in Kingston to ensure that cultural heritage in its broadest of definitions, being all of those things that are difficult, as we just heard from the first conversation of the morning, but also the things that arguably seem easy, like built heritage designations that are in fact quite tangly when we think about those deeper resonant meanings. So you've seen this before. It's been a while perhaps for some. This was the structure of the Engage for Change first year of work. We were working on 10 talking circles with a community partner, 3 Things Consulting. The idea was to generate action items to draft a protocol for the City of Kingston to adopt in early 18 via council, a protocol then that would help us to understand how we engage with the Indigenous community in city business and city matters in a more formal way. We also had the school programming, so we worked with the teachers from the local district school boards for public engagement. Now that we've entered a new school cycle, we did engage almost 300 children in the sort of 16-17 school year, and we're already seeing how that has kind of snowballed into the next year. And this isn't just our work, but again, it's about how are the small things that we initiate kind of rolling out and affecting larger change. So we know now that many teachers in the district are actually engaging in reconciliation projects as part of their core curriculum. And this is a mandate that's coming through the education processes, but one that we've been able to work with those teachers about drafting curriculum. We're also now in a position where we have things like public performances and digital stories. So at the Grand Fatty Legs, which is a story of residential schooling that's been brought to the stage and has an education component, we have over, I believe right now we have about 1,200 students coming to see that performance and engage in that as part of their learning exercises. We have other things happening as well, of course. Council, the idea here is that we were to bring and adopt that protocol through council, and this, as necessary in this process, is shifting as we have noticed and gotten feedback through the Engage for Change process. So we thought naively, as we always begin big things, I think with a degree of naivete, but a passion. We recognize now that the development of a protocol is in some ways too simple. It's so simple that it's almost impossible. And that kind of weird, incongruous nature of let's draft a protocol and that seems easy and it should be ostensibly, but in reality what we've heard and the feedback we've received from this community is that education is still strongly desired. And we need to work hard to make sure that we're doing what is necessary to ensure the community grows in the way that it needs and that gets the support that it requires. Engage for Change and those of us involved with it from the city's perspective are also increasingly getting brought into conversations with nation-to-nation consultation. And this is where the City of Kingston is in conversation with nation-level Indigenous community representation, Mohawk Nation Council of Chiefs. The work that's happening at the Third Crossing is, from our perspective, in a legal parlance, really about nation-to-nation conversation. So we have Indigenous community desire on the local level from our local Kingstonian residents, but we also are now increasingly in dialogue with what we would call this nation-to-nation. And so all of these things have started to move, and that's great, but it has left us kind of thinking about what are the appropriate next steps for the Engage for Change process. This is the blog. If you haven't visited it, I would encourage you to go and see this. This is the Engage for Change blog. It's hosted on the History and Innovation website of the City of Kingston. This was a collaboration effort with members of our local Indigenous population to generate content. And we've actually received feedback where community members from all walks of life, on all different stages of their own journeys, have said to us, you know, some of the information that's been shared here has been quite surprising for them. So for example, one blog post was about, is reconciliation even possible? And they thought, oh, that doesn't sound like what the city should be saying. Like, you shouldn't be questioning this. You're a municipality. You should be certain of the kind of path we're taking. But this has been a really impressive engagement tool from my perspective, because we're getting community members that we usually don't reach, who are reaching back and saying, I don't usually trust the municipal government, and I don't think that the City of Kingston is thinking about my needs. And now they're saying, okay, I'm still a little unsure, but I recognize you're trying to do something, and maybe I do want to have a seat at that table, and I do want to be a part of that conversation in a way that perhaps I didn't feel empowered to do so in the past. This is just an image from, of course, City Hall. These are the students that came to us as part of the end of last year's question about what does reconciliation mean to you? What does it look like for you as part of that youth generation of Kingston? And how can we make changes? And their ideas and the things they brought to the table were incredibly deep, very heartfelt, and actually incredibly well thought out. And this for us is a real demonstration about how much we need to be investing in kind of that youth conversation and how we need to get young voices into this conversation to help us define what their future is going to look like in this city and the protocols that we develop therein. Of course, talking circles. We have concluded now 10 talking circles. They averaged about 30 attendance at each. So in total, we reached out to about 300, various members of the Kingston population from all walks of life to have a conversation about next steps in reconciliation and education. And so every group was different. Every time we met, we heard different things. What I would say right now we're in the process of kind of working through all of the data that was collected and thinking about what the sort of next moves are for us. But one of the things that has continued to resonate after the last talking circle, which happened at HARS on October 16th, is the conversation has moved to, were 10 talking circles enough? And is there a need, in fact, to continue the talking circle conversation, to adapt it perhaps to a more public education process? Is there a way that we sponsor that with community groups? Is there a way to allow community groups to kind of buy into the way that we had set it up or not? So we're receiving a lot of emails, a lot of inquiries, both from outside the corporation, but also interior to it. So I guess the question and the thing I wanted to kind of bring to the table today are those next steps. And I know the nature of how this formal kind of, what are we allowed to discuss kind of in this format is limiting. But I want to share at this point that for us, we're really thinking about how to continue community consultation in an appropriate and effective way. To write an E4C report, which will come through this committee and ultimately go to council as a year-end report on this initiative outlining what the next steps are. I also wanted to highlight that we are in conversation with other individuals, both within the corporation and without. The mayor has expressed interest in fostering relationships. There have been other community meetings happening. So there are a lot of initiatives happening, and we're really working to think about how to bring those together. I would welcome conversation with any and all of you. about this. I don't know what the formalities of our interaction right now or ultimately can allow, but if it permits, I would love to receive feedback or information from you all. If you want to send me an email or reach out to talk about things that you might be thinking, ways that we can engage with you. I mean, I think this group, even when we think about heritage designations for built property, when we're talking about those intangible elements and the stories they tell and things like this, ultimately, in the lens of Engage for Change, for me, this always comes back to an act of decolonization. So, City Hall as a colonial space in some ways needs to bend to the fact that right now we need to think about those decolonization efforts and how we bring a space here that is safe and welcoming and represents all of Kingston. And I think we're taking those steps, complicated by historic designations and national historic sites, but I don't think we should see those as bindings. Instead, we should see them as opportunities to test new mechanisms, to be the kind of protectors of heritage in that largest of definitions, the one that I enjoy operating under. So thank you all. Just an update.
Thank you. Questions from members of the committee are in order. Paul?
I was going to say ladies first, but
Go.
Miigwech for that. As you were talking, I was trying to think of something, what to say to this committee and why it is important to us. And I'm not talking just as an Indigenous person, I'm talking as a citizen of Kingston right now. Knowing how well received this was, knowing how much that the young people are saying it's time, knowing how much even the citizens of Kingston are saying it's time. It's not just the right thing. We actually have a legal obligation through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there's particular 3 action items there that this municipality has to look at particularly. So I think it's important that this committee look at as our responsibility to take this important, not just because it's a feel-good right thing to do right now, but it's a legal obligation we have. It's also an obligation to our citizens. And it's not just the Indigenous community is saying this, it's students are saying it because with working within the education system, teachers are saying it's time for this to happen. The Indigenous community, and we're very fractured in the Indigenous community, and you think Heritage Kingston has its differences. We're very fractured, and we're from all different walks of life, all different communities, different social economic issues. But one of the things is that I think this Indigenous community is in line with the citizens saying it's time to do this. I do want to acknowledge that that this is great work to be done, but it's not the end. And I look forward to see what comes out of this. I look forward to, I encourage the city to look out of the box, because the corporation is an institution, but I think through this Engage for Change, even the 1 or 2 that I attended, I was only allowed to attend 1 officially. But the 2 that I was sort of involved with, it wasn't set in stone, in a box, institutionalized. And I think the city needs to look at that more, think out of the box, not think within itself and how things get done. Because I think the community, citizens at times looks at the corporation as an institution and they don't know how to navigate it. So maybe it's time to think differently of how to navigate this issue. And again, it's our responsibility. So the members here sitting here wondering why we're having this and where does it fit within Heritage Kingston, there's a lot of reasons why. So, miigwech nongwa.
Thank you, Paul. I don't think you were asking for a response. Thank you for your input. Councillor Schell?
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. First, a vote to have Engage for Change to continue, absolutely. I don't know what the structure was of how it was funded. I believe the same sort of organization ran each one, but they were sponsored by different groups. So the idea of Engage for Change, the circles to continue probably with different people leading, because as Paul mentioned, there are many groups in the city, there are many Indigenous groups. So I think, the structure could be run by different people, putting it that way. And I'm not sure who the lead should be each time in terms of finance and decision-making, but it was a fabulous experience. And something that, yes, I noted, and I'm seeing with people, just as the whole, again, the city structure has changed so much in the last 10 years in terms of history and culture. And this is another piece that never was even on the wavelength of a city organization, in Kingston as a city. And there's an interest in historical records of this city. And I know there's been work done through Queens, but I think that's one of the things that we're going to feed into the city more, probably through the Heritage Resource Center. I've chatted with Ryan, and I'm planning to find out more about the archaeological results. When people do digs in Kingston, that's not sort of public information, but I'm sure there's a wealth of information about the city and how it grew, how it was created, 500 years ago, the artifacts found. And I think certainly as a councillor, I'm going to encourage that process continue of information being gathered by the city for availability to the public, because certainly, as we all know, the first thing you need to know is have some knowledge of what went on, not conjecture, but not what your next door neighbor said about what Dad said 6 months or 60 years ago, but some actual knowledge that we can build on as we continue this process. So thanks for that. And as I say, my vote, Engage for Change, and that sort of process continue, absolutely. Students being involved, this is great. And again, something the city didn't used to do, and I'm really pleased it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie, you're next.
Just a question and a suggestion. I was just wondering if you've made any connections with Queens, students at Queens. Like, for instance, there's the Indigenous Student Council, I believe, with various, there's so many very interesting initiatives happening within the Queens community led by students. And I think they could be real youth leaders in a process like this as well. That'd be my recommendation.
Vance?
I think that's great, Jamie, and it's a good suggestion. We did reach out with the Queens community groups to sponsor Four Directions, was involved in one of the talking circles, and certainly we're hoping to have an ongoing dialogue with them. The students are certainly hungry, I think, to participate and contribute in those ways, and that's great. And I think right now in this moment, we have a great opportunity, like you said, to think about how do we kind of roll this out and empower it through these different groups, for sure. So point well taken, and certainly one we're working to address. I just wanted to loop back quickly to Councillor Schell. The funding was $83,000 was received from Canadian Heritage, which largely paid for the talking circles and the work that we did in this year. Council did approve, as part of sesquicentennial celebrations, $100,000 in support of the Engage for Change initiative. We were very fortunate in that we were able to offset some of that spending through that Canadian Heritage receipt. And so right now we're in conversation about next phase. There is money earmarked to support this, but how do we then report back to Council about the spending we've made, but also then the intentions moving forward about how to most effectively kind of roll that out. So I feel good that right now we still are in a good position to be able to do this work with what we were originally allocated. But I think right now is the time for these updates and sort of this next directions conversation to be happening. I also did just want to add that the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport are actually engaging in a redefinition of where archaeological materials will ultimately end up being housed. And we've been invited into that dialogue. There's no promise for what that's going to look like at the end of the day. But actually, to Paul's earlier point, TRC recommendation 57 through 61, if you want to quote me, really do impact municipalities and their relationship both to museum collections and archaeological materials. So there's a lot of pieces here, both legislative, kind of locally, municipally funded, and then kind of community engagement exercises. So thank all three of you for your input.
Anyone else? Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to speak not as chair.
Yes, I'll take the chair and recognize you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for all the work so far. And thank you especially for mentioning today the points about this being a colonial space and the inherent paradox that represents. If you even look at the name of the movement, Engage for Change, the word change, what is it that we are proposing that be changed? And I think, see, a lot of people take Truth and Reconciliation federal initiative kind of for granted. They don't ever stop and think what they're actually suggesting. The change that we're talking about is decolonization, as you mentioned. And what does that mean? That means that all of the assumptions that our culture is based on left out a very important aspect, and that is respect for the origins of the original inhabitants of this land. That's what reconciliation's ultimate focus is on. I mean, it seems silly to say it out loud because it should be obvious and self-evident, but it is actually the reason that we're finding it so difficult to make progress. For example, when you mentioned that naively we just adopt a protocol and it would be part of the, it was easy to add the recognition statement that the mayor reads at the beginning of council meetings. Easy in the sense that all you have to do is convince the mayor that it's a worthwhile thing to do, and that was done. So great, and that is, so that maybe that was the part that was easy to achieve. But the protocol is putting the cart before the horse if the general population has not yet come to the conclusion that the change is absolutely essential. Because what you get instead, and this is happening at the federal level all over the place, you get fake change. You get an appearance of acknowledgement. You get a lot of talk, and you don't get any real change. That happens on other things at the federal level, but it especially is happening on this file, not by everybody. There are some that are sincere, but but a lot of people are only pretending to be sincere. And that was the problem with the relationship between the colonialists and the Indigenous peoples at the very beginning. Insincere statements. So if that never stops, we will never finish this file. And so I would say that as you engage in this process, you make sure you remind everyone that we have a reputation of saying things and not following up. We as a colonial culture. And that's the thing that needs to change. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you wish to respond?
No, other than I mean, well stated.
I return the chair.
Anyone else? Yes, Sherman.
Thank you. What comes to my mind in this process is what is my privilege? Everyone around this table, what's your privilege that others didn't have? Don't have. Why is it that this committee is white? What are we doing that necessitates the availability to the public that we show up white, right? So I think it's valuable for us to consider what is our privilege. And when we do that, we're going to see where we stand above others, where we think we do. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherman. I think everyone has spoken that wants to speak. Okay, well, thank you very much. And of course, it will be continued. If you wanted to say something else, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Sherman, for sharing that. Just yesterday, I just wanted to share that, BCK is on site this week, Beyond Classrooms Kingston, talking about local government. And one of the initiatives we've been focusing on is diversity representation on council, on committees, in all of the work that we do in engagement. And that's not just about the Indigenous community, that's about diversity in all of its facets. I just wanted to share, because I think there's always an importance to relocate ourselves in a situation of hope. We had really good conversations yesterday with members from ISCA and KIP, and we had lots of engagement around how can people get involved in committee structures and opening government in all of its facets to the diversity that's represented in our population. It's absolutely about locating yourself in a field of privilege, but we also can locate ourselves as allies and supporters of those initiatives. So thank you, Sherman. I think it's tremendous that you're able to share and think about those things in those ways, because that's really the onus on us in a position of privilege to think about how do we call other voices to the table and then make space for them to speak. Yeah.
Miigwech, Nyalwen. Our next item is another briefing from Mackenzie on the Heritage Grant Bylaw update, and I think there'll be an introduction from Mr. Newman. And again, as we just had with this Engage for Change item, it can be a bit of a discussion, even if there's no vote attached to the item. So, Mr. Newman, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'll say is Mackenzie's going to give a briefing on the proposed changes to the Heritage Grant Bylaw. It's something we've been working on for the past 6 to 8 months, maybe a bit longer. And we have had an open house, and I think Mackenzie will touch on the efforts to engage the public that we've undertaken to date. But today we're presenting the substantial changes to the bylaw. We're looking for the input from the committee members today on these changes, whether or not generally there's support or not. The feedback that we received today will be used in trying to finalize the bylaw. It is our goal to be in a position to present council with the final bylaw this year, partly because one of the proposed changes is to go to a window for submissions, and if that is supported by the committee and council, then we'd like to be able to open the window for January 1st. If there's not support for the window, or if it takes us longer to digest the comments that we received today, then that's fine. Maybe what we would do is consider presenting to council that in the first year of the administration of this program, perhaps the window is extended a month or two, recognizing when the bylaw may be in full force and effect. So today we're looking for feedback. We're going to receive the feedback, take it back, digest it, try to finalize the bylaw so that we can bring it back potentially for our next meeting. But as I say, we'll see what the comments have and whether or not it's reasonable to think that we can finalize the bylaw in time. So, thank you.
Yes, just to clarify what you just said. So your intent at this point is to have an actionable item on the next Heritage agenda before it goes to council?
That's correct. So we would be looking for support from the committee with a recommendation to council, that council then give all 3 readings to the bylaw.
Okay, so if you understand, members, that means today is like the preliminary, like pre-consultation, if you wish, with the briefing, and our comments will be received, but they'll be in the form of questions after the briefing, and then the actionable item will be when it comes back to us before the end of the year, hopefully. Okay, very clear. Thank you. And that kind of answers Don's question from earlier. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the grant bylaw that we've been undertaking, the steps so far and the timing of what we're going to do next, and the major amendments being proposed. So just to start, the purpose of the update, the intent behind the project. The Heritage Grant Bylaw was established in 2005 with only 2 amendments since its establishment, and the last being in 2007, which was 10 years ago. So that was a major driver for the update. Secondly, as you well know, Council's made a significant commitment to designation. We're actively designating new properties pretty well monthly. There's 9 new properties being proposed today on the agenda. So with the increase in designations, we're anticipating also an increase in grant applications. So this update has tried to consider how we would deal with that influx. And then thirdly, just a kind of general cleaning up of the bylaws. You can imagine there were references to programs that no longer exist, some definitions. For instance, we've added examples of eligible and ineligible work, just to try to communicate the intent of the program a little bit better so that we could administer the program more successfully. So what we've done up until this point, this process began really last year, starting with a review of the grant program as it exists, but also a review of how other municipalities in Ontario are approaching grant programs and other financial incentive programs. We also did a public survey in the spring to ask for feedback from the public to see how they wanted the program to function, what was working, what's not. And then based on that, we put together a draft, which we brought to the Heritage Working Group. And then that generated a good discussion, which we made some tweaks and brought a revised draft to a public open house in August. So we've done quite a bit of public engagement so far. And based on the feedback we received in August, we've considered those comments in this last version of the draft, which is currently available online. And today was originally intended to be the last day for comments from the public. So just a quick overview for comparison. The way the bylaw works right now, the program works, applications for eligible properties, for eligible work, are received starting in March, and eligible properties can receive 50% of the project cost up to $2,000. Those applications have to be tied to a heritage permit, and they must be submitted together. And then all grant applications are reviewed by this committee. So the major changes that we're proposing an increase of the amount of funding per grant up to $5,000 from the current $2,000. We're proposing to limit certain types of projects for replacement of asphalt shingles, cleaning of masonry, the replacement of aluminum eaves troughs that would only be eligible for 50% up to $2,500. And just to draw the committee's attention, we're proposing to ask for an increase in the total annual budget from council from the $36,000 up to $50,000. So the way the program works now, the applications have to be submitted together. We're proposing that permits could have been approved previously within the last 12 months. So this is to kind of capture situations where perhaps an emergency repair was done or funding had been given out, exhausted, and an applicant wasn't eligible to receive funding. And then thirdly, this is probably the biggest change, is to receive all grant applications at the beginning of the year, starting January 1st until the last business day in March, to assess the proposals against each other. So at the end of the application period, staff would assess the applications, and if they met all of the eligibility requirements and the total amount requested was less than the annual budget, then we could award all of the project's funding. However, if the total was more than the requested amount, we're proposing to rank the applications and give funding to the highest scoring projects. So just the fifth point there, if the total budget was not exhausted after the first round, we're proposing to still consider applications on a first come, first served basis after that first window. As Mr. Newman mentioned, we're taking comments from the public online until today. and then hoping to bring a recommendation to the next Heritage Kingston meeting in November, in hopes of getting the program in place for the new year. So that was kind of a high-level overview. Happy to have a discussion this morning and receive your comments. Just so the committee is aware, all 3 versions of the grant bylaw are available online on the city's website. And if you have any comments or receive any comments, if you could forward them to my attention, that would be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to have questions from members of the committee. Catherine, you can go first.
I think that, staff, I think, have to be really congratulated for increasing the number of designated properties and continuing to do that. One of the issues that arises for me in that context is, given what this proposal seeks to do, that we are increasing the fund from 36,000 to 50,000, and we are doubling the limit, more than doubling the limit from 2 to 5,000. So in fact, what we're doing is we have a larger number of potential applicants. We now have a possibility of 18 or a bit more, depending, grants to give out, and we're proposing to reduce that to 10, which, on one side, I guess you can say that that's good, you increase the competition. I think it's going to put some people off. I think that when, the number, when people see that there are 10 possible grants out there, that there's, I'm not going to bother doing this. And so, it seems to me that a more, a slower process, if you like, would perhaps be more helpful in the sense of, yes, increase it. If you increased it to 2,500, then there would be 20 grants. If you kept it the same, it would be 2,750. I just think it should be proportional to the increase in the fund and to actually reduce the number of grants that would be available. I think it would be very disappointing if that were to happen.
We'll continue to go. There'll probably be some overlap with the comments, and we'll go around first and then maybe go back to staff for a response. So, Paul, you can go next.
Sort of along the same lines, you're going from possibly 18 grant applications to 10 or less because of the $2,500 for aluminum. Can you go back to that one screen where it says aluminum, like where you're going up to 25? Yeah. So it could be even less than 10. Can you possibly give us a number of what is the average cost? Is it more? Like, does everybody $2,000 does that cover usually half of most of them, or is that not enough in that? The other thing is, you're talking about asphalt shingles, clean mist, and replace aluminum eave troughs. What heritage value does those have to a heritage building? And if they don't have any heritage value, why are we covering that within a heritage grant? Because then it depletes that, even that smaller amount, the 10. I do agree, if you're going to designate more, you're going to have a potential of more applicants. That's my only concern.
Thank you. Jamie, you're next.
I think Mackenzie probably knows what I'm going to say. First of all, I'd like to say I think this is great, the changes, and it really demonstrates a sincere, interest and dedication to protecting heritage, built heritage in Kingston. However, I think particularly in light of these changes, the grant program could be further strengthened by differentiating between types of applicants for primarily individual community members who privately own a house and it's the house they live in. And as a way to mitigate, they apply to this grant as a way to mitigate their personal costs versus, yeah, I know you agree too, in terms of private businesses who would be using the grant to mitigate costs or essentially their profit margins. And I know the argument is that they're in a heritage building, that building needs to be protected, and I agree with that. However, I do think there's an optic issue here as well as a point of principle, being that, ostensibly it could be perceived that the City of Kingston is prepared to use public funds to support a profit margin of a business. Whereas I would suggest, my recommendation perhaps would be to say they can't apply, but give them a slightly different application and perhaps a different monetary amount that they are allowed to access. I think the focus should be on supporting individual residents of Kingston. Thank you.
Did you know? Oh. Don?
Yes, well, I'm quite impressed with the amount of thought that's gone into this proposal. There are a lot of difficult issues, and I'm sure nobody will be entirely satisfied with the procedures. But I do have some concerns, as almost everybody does, so I'll state them here, and we may discuss them a bit more later. I thought it would be, I kind of regret that the committee hasn't already got the draft bylaw in their hands so they could look at the details. So I did copy my own, or download my own, and so I have looked through that, and some questions, a couple of questions come up. One of them is actually up there on the screen. Why do you say asphalt shingles rather than roofing? And why do you say aluminum eaves troughs rather than eaves troughs? There's lots of galvanized metal eaves troughs that need replacing, as well as aluminum eaves troughs actually last a lot longer than other ones. So I'm a little puzzled by the wording there. And would suggest the kind of change that I mentioned. Also, I noticed an item at the end where it's actually 9.4, whereas I think the intent of it is that the current bylaw says that if the property is in arrears for taxes or work orders or something like that, they're not eligible for that. But 9.4 seems to say that the director may approve a grant application if an outstanding order relates to a heritage attribute, and the funding will allow that work to be completed. So my understanding is that if a heritage attribute is in, decaying or something like that, and in some respects the property or the person isn't eligible to apply for a heritage grant, the director may use their discretion to something like that. So that's my question there. My one other comment has to do not with the sort of mechanics, which on the whole I think they're pretty good. But I realize not everybody likes them. But I'm concerned about the procedure, and that the new procedures remove this committee and council from any oversight over the grants program. I think that's a mistake.
Thank you, Don. Maybe I'll go next. I have a few points. regarding what Don just said, we'll go kind of backwards. So on the point of removing the oversight of the committee or council, there's another possibility. For me, I'd back up even further and say that the problem with the model isn't in the structure, but in the removal of any civilian input or residents' input. So, for example, to contrast it with a different grants program, the arts funding grant program, which it's a committee made up of all members of the public, which happen to be all members of the arts community, and 2 councillors as well that are ex officio, so don't vote, but participate in the discussion. I've been part of that, so I've seen it up close. Obviously, that places a very high priority on input from the public. In fact, the decisions are made by members of the public. So in this model, decisions are made by members of staff, and perhaps the professional staff need to be the ones making the decisions, because they're the only ones with the full big picture knowledge of how it all fits in. But there should still be input either at a working group level or at the committee or council level, because committee and council are also made up of members of the public. So in other words, I would strongly recommend against having a process that's 100% handled by staff only, because then you miss all of the public perception pieces and things that will generate a backlash. You won't necessarily have access to that information in a timely manner if you're doing it all internally. Regarding the deadline, so the proposed window, so start in January to March, and then if not enough applications are put in for the 50,000, then you're saying then it's first come, first served, sort of like the old way. I would say consider third option, which would be if you don't have the 50,000 applied for by the end of the window, extending the deadline. That happens often with grant applications. So extend the deadline until you do have at least enough so that you can do the comparative process. I think that's one of the best parts of this new model, is that you're comparing applications against each other. Leaving aside my earlier point about members of the public participating, it should be, it is a better way of giving out the grants than first come, first serve, and I believe that you're on the right track there. So rather than revert back to first come, first serve, if you don't get enough applications, I would suggest to extend the deadline until you do, and hope, obviously within reason, because you still have to make the decisions in a calendar year, so you can't extend it forever. But I would suggest that as a solution. And then the third point I have is what Jamie mentioned about private versus commercial. So she's suggesting a 2-tiered system. It's more complicated, unfortunately, but I would guess that her position enjoys the support of a majority of members of the public if they were asked about that point. Not all, of course. None of the maybe the individuals that rely very heavily on the rental for their commercial model, but there's a problem with the suggestion. For example, if I were to buy the house that I currently rent, it has 6 units in it. One of them is a commercial space, which is for offices only. It's not habitable. It's in the basement. I currently rent that as well. There's 2 units above, one large, one small, both rented by Queen students at the moment. All of this rent goes to my landlord. It's a residential space. The landlord isn't making that much money, especially if he's doing renovations to the heritage building, which is from 1850. If I was to buy the building, I wouldn't be doing it for the commercial aspect. I would be doing it to raise enough money from rent to pay for the maintenance of the building, and I would be taking on that responsibility. That's the kind of decision that many heritage homeowners make. They decide to be the stewards of the building, and if they rent out a unit of a larger building, and many of the heritage buildings are large enough to do that, it's not really the same thing. So that's where it becomes difficult to split the hairs. We'd have to have a very specific definition of what is a commercial use of a building. And just to point out how thorny this is, during the interim control bylaw debate, I mentioned in the media, not at council, but in the media, I mentioned the possibility of charging commercial tax rates to owners of rental properties, because currently they're paying residential tax rates. That's part of the reason we have so many commercial landlords in Kingston, is because they're taking advantage of that tax structure, the residential tax rate. That is a fundamental change that I've suggested in the media. It would be revolutionary, and the backlash was very swift amongst rental owners, as you can imagine. So what you're saying is a little bit controversial, and because of the reality that many heritage buildings might be a hybrid model, might be actually a single owner that rents out one unit, you'd need to have strict definitions of that, maybe number of rental units that you manage or something like that. But I like the idea, and I think that most residents in areas with heritage buildings would probably agree. Thank you. I should have given up the chair there, I suppose, but anyway. Mac, you want to go?
Thank you. I'm sorry that I'm late. Somebody might have brought this up, I'm not sure, but one thing it seems to me in the old days when we used to have really substantial money for restoration work, you had to be doing real restoration work. You know, it wasn't just, because there's a vinyl window in there, you put a vinyl, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but there's real difference between doing something that's actually part of the initial restoration of the house, like, the proper shingles or the proper wood details to pull something that looks like it, which I don't have a problem with in lots of cases them doing, but I don't think we should pay any grant. Particularly now there being $2,000, I think doesn't matter, but if you're getting $5,000 or more, then I think it should get back to doing real authentic restoration. And the only, so I guess what you're proposing is that you get all the bids together and then make a choice as opposed to just first come first serve, which I think is a good idea. My only concern there, and maybe you could do like in like 2 half seasons or something like that, because people are wanting to do work and they got to wait for 4 months to find out whether they're not getting a grant or not. It doesn't seem very, we're trying to make this process quicker and it's just making it slower. So if you were going to, I like the idea of making choice, although it might be difficult, but making choices, and that'll bring us probably closer to the proper restoration, not restoration, but I think all the applications should be for true restoration. But if you had like one section in the spring, then one section for the end of summer or something, if you didn't get all the amounts in for the spring, as opposed to waiting to get all the bids. Oh, there we go, okay. Thank you. Personally, I don't think there should be any difference between commercial and residential. I mean, there's some residential people that are getting grants who are multimillionaires, but they've got a heritage building. We're talking about the building, we're not talking about what's happening inside the building. I don't feel there should be any difference, whether it's owned by commercial or it's a commercial building or residential building. It's a building that we're supporting, and I think that anybody should be able to take advantage of that equally. And the last thing I didn't quite understand, just your comments about a commercial rate. I know my I've got an office in the back of my house, and I pay, it's not a very big office, and I pay, a third of the tax I pay for the whole house. So I mean, there is a difference already in residential and commercials. You talk about something where there is a commercial below and residential above, or something, or? I didn't quite understand your comments about how.
No, I made the suggestion in the media that property management companies that are managing commercial properties or the rents, the 100% of the buildings for rent should maybe be reclassified as commercial for tax purposes, knowing that it's a different rate.
Even though it's a residential building?
This was, and then the end of that comment was, and that extra money that we raise in taxes we can put into bylaw enforcement. This is in the context of property standards not being enforced.
Okay, I'm still a bit confused, but anyways, I mean, commercial rates are so much higher than residential rates. If it's a residential building, it should be residential rates as far as I'm concerned. But okay, that's what I got to say.
Councillor Schell?
Thank you. What a great discussion. Just to reiterate, this grant program is for the buildings, not for the owners. When the discussion was going on, I thought maybe it could even be a blind process. You don't know who owns the building. The grant application is to the building. And I'm sure the legal department is right in there with this, any kind of discussion of grading buildings as to, you know, who's going to get the grant, because I think that's part of it, that staff would be deciding who gets the grants and in what amounts through a process that obviously would have to pass the legal test. You can't, you know, decide one more than the other unless you actually have a policy that buildings of 1850 get the grants first, 1860 they get them second, you know. You could get into a terrible process, and I think that's part of what I'm hearing. You could get into an incredibly onerous process, and I think staff are trying to make it clear and fair and timely, and that's what I'm hearing. But the discussion has been excellent. So that would be my suggestion, a blind process. We don't know. You don't know who owns the property while it's happening, but that's just a small part of it. Thank you.
Okay, I guess we've gone around. So staff's been writing down suggestions. I don't know if there's any immediate commentary that you want to make. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll start, and if Ms. Kim would like to jump in, she's more than welcome to. So to Catherine's comment, I saw it, was it a backup slide? So there has been some dialogue about the value and whether or not the value of the grant dollar should be proportional to the amount of dollars in the pocket of money that council provides to support this program. We wanted to just share this information with the committee because we have done a review of the value of the grants that have been issued over the last 3 years to see, based on the number that have been submitted, how many would have actually been entitled to the full 5,000. And so it's tough to read there, but just the yellow would have been entitled to the 5,000. So it's, by my math here, it's 25 applications received over the last 3 years, excluding this year, and 6 of them were over the threshold that would have been eligible for 5,000. So it's about 25% when you do the math of the applications in the last 3 years would have been eligible for the full 5. So it's not a direct sort of proportional relationship to doubling the amount of the grant dollars is going to mean that we have half as many people being entitled to the funds. It doesn't work out that way, or at least it hasn't in the past 3 years.
Sorry, I just want to interrupt for a sec. This addresses Catherine and Paul's point. So, because I did the same thing when I first looked at it, I said, oh my God, that's less grants. But what he's saying is that they came up with the number of 50,000 based on analysis of actual last 3-year grant applications. And so what you're saying now is that 50,000 and the increase to 5,000 maximum would only affect a quarter of the larger applications, right? The quarter of the applications were large enough to be eligible, and that the average grant number would be not that much higher than 2,000, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it's just looking here, it's typically between the grant dollar, if it was 50% of the works, it would typically land between $200 and $3,500. So we're going to end up, ideally, supporting between 10 and 20 projects if this were implemented next year.
And was it the purpose of the new structure to reduce the number of grant applications, or is it anticipated to be about the same?
No, I mean, one of the other points brought up was, I think actually Catherine brought this up as well, is like people feel there's a bit of nuisance to even applying, and so some people feel that applying for $2,000 isn't worth it. Some of the comments that we've heard through the open house and public discussions is that 2,000 isn't enough. They're not actually going to undertake a major restoration project if all they get is 2,000. And that, I think, should be concerning to the committee because it's some of those bigger cost items that really ought to be undertaken for the conservation of the resource. Big masonry projects, for example, where there's maybe a structural component there where the building itself is compromised. Ideally, we'd be able to put a little more money out there to support those projects. So that's part of the thinking that's gone in behind this. Should I respond
Sorry,
in
is this
total?
on the same, you have a clarification question on the same item? Okay, go ahead.
I just briefly, I think that if, I know lots of people who just don't bother applying because $2,000 isn't worth it. But if it was $5,000, you probably would have more applications over the $10,000 limit too. But I understand your logic and that certainly makes sense, but there would be more if there's more money there.
Catherine, on the same point?
Yeah, I'm alongside Mac on this. I think that history is one thing, but people respond to what the opportunities are. And if, people have known that it's 2,000, and so that's why they've put in those applications. But I think that you will get a lot more larger applications if you offer $5,000. I don't think, you can sort of just go back to history and then project it forward. I don't think it's going to work like that.
Okay, continue.
So one of the comments that Paul brought up was what's the value, what's the heritage value of the asphalt shingles? And I think Mac brought this up as well, is why are we supporting some of these projects that maybe don't add a lot of value to the conservation of the resource. So that's partly why we did want to have a lesser grant entitlement to things like the repair of roofing or eaves. So I think to Don's point as well, we can go back and simplify the language, make it broader so that we're not being overly specific to vinyl eaves or asphalt roofing. So we'll go back and broaden that out.
Sorry, Greg, and on that same notion, I didn't mention it at the time, but what about non-original windows? Because there's always this repair versus replace. We've been giving grants to people that are replacing. So would that be another thing we could consider for that lesser grant amount?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's something we would consider. The way that it's in the bylaw currently is that if it meets the windows policy, then they would be eligible for the grant.
So I'd like you to consider somehow incentivizing repair in the grant program if you can, because even though it may pass the criteria for the windows policy, repairing is always preferable to replacing if possible. Yeah, if you're going to replace with new, you want one that fits the windows policy. Right, but what I'm suggesting is that you further dichotomize incentivizing repairing by maybe not putting a limit on the repair, but that's just a suggestion.
I think what Mac had said was if someone replaced with a full wood window, or under a window policy, you can put in a steel covered, metal covered, which still isn't authentic, but if someone would replace with a true wood replacement window, it'd get the 5,000. I think that's where it was leading.
Maybe staff could consult further with Mac about the technical aspects, but there's actually probably a continuum of preference when you're doing windows, and maybe the windows policy and the grant together could incentivize the best practices. Yes, Don?
I think there's a little bit of wandering from the point. This business about roofing and eaves troughs and cleaning masonry have very little to do with heritage attributes. Every house needs that kind of work, and so I think staff are quite right in reducing the amounts that are targeted towards things that are more or less maintenance and common to all properties. When getting into windows is a very difficult and different subject, and we shouldn't complicate that original point with how we deal with windows.
So we'll, maybe if members of the committee want to sort of sleep on that and give us your thoughts, Mackenzie's away for the next couple of weeks, but Ryan and I would like to finalize the bylaw. Just ideally, again, it doesn't sound like there's any opposition to the window idea, window for submissions. So it sounds like we might be in a position to try and move this forward for November. The one thing I just will mention on the distinction between the general reference to roofing and asphalt roofing was if someone's replacing a slate roof, that's a fairly substantial investment, and that is something that ideally we'd maybe want to entitle to $5,000 potentially. So if we're going to have the two-tiered approach, I think we need to be really purposeful in identifying what would only be entitled to up to 25 versus 5,000. So if you can think on that a little more and give us your thoughts, we will do the same and see if we can craft something that makes sense. Just the distinction between a for-profit versus not-for-profit owner, my suggestion is that we don't go down that road. It really is ultimately the conservation of the resource that is the purpose of the funding. I thought Mac brought an interesting point up that a lot of people that own these buildings, some of these designated buildings are worth well over $1 million. So it gets into a tough area for staff to base a decision. So I'd suggest that we not go down that path.
I just wanted to add, I've recently become aware that our counterparts in housing offer a restoration grant program that, as I understand, is based on need. So if that is some other avenue, as I think the Councillor Stroud suggested, that might be a different program that we could point applicants to if that sort of situation was something to be considered.
Don provided a comment, and I didn't quite catch it, so maybe you could clarify. I think it was with respect to tax arrears or a situation where
Yeah, it was really what was the meaning of the item 9.4 in the draft bylaw. When I read it, it took me a long time to puzzle it out, but I think Mackenzie was nodding her head when so maybe she should answer.
Thank you. Sure. Is that better? Okay. The intent behind that section, it's something that's included in the bylaw currently. And some interpretation we've made, it's for situations where an attribute of a property is being compromised. There potentially is a property standards order that relates to that attribute. So in those cases, we didn't want to exclude the owner from being able to apply if the grant would go towards the restoration of the attribute. I think that covers it.
So we may do some wordsmithing to make that clearer.
Sorry, Greg, before you go to your next point, Paul, I think, wanted to clarify something.
Sure. To clarify Don's point, so Don, you're okay with the two-tier, the 2,500, if they're doing, or less, if they're not doing like heritage, or would you be more apt to say, if it's not a heritage value, it's maintenance? And then the second one, while I have the floor, you were saying there's another possible fund. A lot of times when people do grants, they do ask, are you accessing other municipal funds? Will that take into account, so sort of double dipping, if you want to say it, will that be acknowledged that if you're doing this model where you review everybody together, if someone's already receiving funds from someone else, will that lessen the amount, or will that?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Paul's point, the way the bylaw is written currently is that you wouldn't be eligible to receive grants from several or more than one program at the same time. For instance, the Heritage Fund administered through the museums, they offer some project-based and programming-based funding. So if the project, if the scopes basically didn't overlap, then you may be eligible for both. We didn't want to exclude if the projects, if the concrete project, let's say a built attribute would be funded through one program and the programming of another, then I think that would be eligible.
Okay, so we'll let Greg finish, and then just keep in mind that there's actionable item is actually going to be on our next meeting probably, and that's where the full debate should happen. What we're trying to do is get the input in for them so that the final product that we get to consider is fully polished. So that's, and you can continue to send suggestions by email if something comes to you, if you take a closer look, as Don has on the draft bylaw. We will lose one member soon. I think Sherman said he can only stay for 2 hours. So we may have quorum issues and Mac as well. So we need to get to the business. Otherwise, we've just spent the entire special meeting on non-actionable items and we'll need another special meeting. So go ahead, Greg.
So I'll be very brief. So Councillor Stroud, you offered a suggestion for potential extension of the window as opposed to going straight to first come, first serve if there's remaining funds available after the first window. So that's something we will certainly look at. And then Mac had also suggested 2 half sessions or seasons for the windows. So we'll look for a window for submission. So we'll look at that as well. The last item I think that was discussed was just how we engage the committee and some concerns that the committee is being cut out of the process. What I can suggest is that, as we currently do, we bring grant applications to the committee for comment, so we would continue to do that. What I would suggest that we could do, it would be a procedural thing, so I don't know if it would be articulated in the bylaw, but we could establish a procedural document that says that we would engage the Heritage Properties Working Group after staff have gone through their first round of submissions with our recommendations, see what the discussion is amongst the group, and then bring a report with all of the recommendations for grants, the dollar amount, the related projects to the committee for consideration. We could probably build a component of that into the bylaw. There's an administration section in the bylaw that said we could say something like planning staff shall engage the committee in the review of the submissions in the first window or something like that. So we'll look at that as well as to how it might be articulated in the bylaw, but if it's not explicit in the bylaw, I'm thinking an administrative document to accompany the bylaw would be something we could do as well.
The point being that it's not the intention to remove all citizen input to the process.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let's keep moving. Business, 8D, statutory. First one's 218 King Street East. I think looks like Mackenzie's going to introduce it. I'm going to run to the bathroom quick. Yeah, Mac's going to give his pecuniary statement. I'm going to run to the bathroom quickly. So Don, if you don't need to go, if you could take over the chair, I'll be right back.
So Mackenzie, will you go ahead with presenting this item?
Great. I'll be brief. So this application pertains to the property at 218 King Street East. It's located on the west side of King Street, the corner of Earl and King. It contains a 2.5-story limestone house constructed in the 1830s with several rear later additions. The main dwelling was constructed around 1830, while the one-story garage at the rear was constructed in the mid-20th century. The property is designated under Part 4 and also Part 5 as part of the Old Sydenham District. This is a close-up image of the rear garage. The subject property is located in the King Street corridor. It's identified in the Old Sydenham District Plan as the ceremonial entrance to the downtown. The attributes of the sub-area include buildings that form the strong street edge, prominent buildings at corners, and buildings associated with prominent Kingston architects, as well as views to the lake and city park. The designation bylaw notes this building was a typical example of Kingston's limestone residences constructed in the 1830s. The 2.5-story building has undergone several renovations over the years. But as I mentioned, it was originally constructed in the 1830s as a private residence and has been converted for a variety of commercial uses. This application has been submitted to construct a new timber arched pergola above the modern garage. Currently, the patio that's above the garage features a simple, naturally stained wooden balustrade that echoes the traditional rectilinear forms in the area. According to the applicant, the patio is underutilized and they'd like to use the space as an exterior room without feeling enclosed. The proposal includes the construction of a timber inverse arched pergola that would be connected in the center with a steel collar, and the timbers are proposed to be laminated fir beams with raised posts at the corner to allow for the curves. The beams are proposed to be left a natural color in order to tie into the existing cedar railings and not draw attention from the main building. Additionally, the applicant has included wooden timber privacy screens, which have been identified as necessary to ensure there's no adverse impact on neighboring properties. So this application has been reviewed against the district plan and the designation bylaw, and it meets the intent of those policies. This application was circulated to internal departments whose comments have been incorporated as conditions where appropriate. This application is subject to a minor variance application to accommodate the non-complying side yard setback, and that application will go before the Committee of Adjustment on Monday the 23rd. This application was circulated to Heritage Kingston through the DASH process. Staff received a number of comments in support of the application, noting that it appears to be an appropriate addition to the modern element and meets the district plan policies. One member raised concerns with respect to the shade, having no shade on the deck, and expressed that having blinds or awnings would not be appropriate, and this was forwarded to the applicant, who's advised that that's not the intent of the space. They want to keep it unenclosed. And this application did come before the committee at the last meeting in September for a pre-consult, at which no significant concerns were raised. So in conclusion, given that the proposed new addition will facilitate the continued use of the space as desired by the owner, while still maintaining the heritage attributes of the building and those in the district, staff support this application. Thanks.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I'll return the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Sorry? Yes, just remind everyone this is part 5 process that we're following. So were your comments in dash, this first piece is, were your comments in dash, the three of you made comments in dash, were they accurately captured in the package, in the thing? Yes, okay. And, right, so members of the public now have a chance to speak, but there's no one here. And then you have a chance now to put any final comments into the file, which will then go back to staff as they prepare a report to council. Would anyone wish to put any final comments verbally at this point? Great, excellent, way to be organized. With that said, we will vote on the recommendation so that Heritage Kingston supports council's approval of the following, always the wording with part 5s. And then you see the the 4 conditions. So we need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Catherine. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Good luck with your work. Next one is 104 Bagot Street. Removal of the second floor balcony. Looks like Ryan's got this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property is also in the Sydenham District. It's at 104 Bagot Street. The property is located on the northwest side of Bagot, just not far from City Park. And it includes a one unit in a 3-unit, 2-story brick row house known as Park Place. And this is the unit here. Its cultural value is based on the building itself, known as Park Place. The name has been around at least since 1904, but could have been around since the beginning. Since the building was built in 1873, it was built for a hardware merchant named Chown, and it forms part of the streetscape on Bagot in the Old Sydenham District. The application before you is to remove this balcony. The balcony appears to be a later addition to the building. And it disrupts, as you can see, the rhythm of the openings along the Bagot Street, as well as it conceals the keystone and the brick arch. So staff therefore support the removal of this balcony. Our circulated comments, agencies came back with only one noting that the building permit is required for this alteration. This committee was circulated through DASH. We had a couple of concerns noting the requirement for the type of brick, given size and color and such, and then that any damage from where the balcony is now be repaired, and that has been added as a condition of our recommended approval. And Mr. Chair, we do recommend approval of this application.
Thank you, Ryan. So again, the process, those of you, which in this case is just Dawn, because Peter's not here, were your comments captured accurately? Yes? Members of the public are also not here, so here's your chance for final oral submissions. Seeing none, I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Paul, seconded by Mac. So it is that the alteration be that we support council's approval of the alteration, which is the removal of that balcony, and there are 3 conditions. Yes, Don.
Sorry, I did have a final comment that I didn't have a chance. Matching brick is good, is important. Matching color of mortar is also very important. And I've seen many examples downtown where brickwork has been repaired by masons who are not careful about that, and you get sort of white mortar in a otherwise dull gray house, and also even many cases where the bricks are not even, the mortar is not even cleaned off the bricks, so the bricks are half covered with mortar. So it is really important when patching or replacing brickwork that it be done by experts, and you want to make sure that they know what the standards need to.
Yes, so we see condition number 3, any damaged bricks be carefully repaired and replaced with bricks of similar color size. Would that include the cleaning of the mortar off the bricks in that condition? Is there leeway in the way it's worded, or something that you could communicate to the applicant, maybe?
Mr. Chair, it certainly was our intention that the bricks be replaced and repaired properly and that they are cleaned properly. I will certainly relay this to the applicant and ensure that that's done right, and we'll go out and check on it afterwards.
Is that okay, Don? Okay. So we'll vote on the recommendation. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Good luck with the work. And now we have the designation item. I believe there's 9 addresses, and therefore 18 clauses, 2 for each address. We've heard from a delegation on the Alfred Street KCVI one, and we'll hear from Ryan about the entirety.
I must admit, Mr. Chair, I don't think we've ever done 9 in one fell swoop, so this is very exciting. So before you today is a proposed notice of intention to designate 9 properties in the city of Kingston. So the report outlines the background work that we've done. Each of these properties was evaluated under Ontario Regulation 906, which requires an evaluation of their design, historical, associative, and contextual value. And it was determined that these properties satisfy one or more of these regulations, and therefore accordingly can be designated under the Heritage Act. The first property for you is the Kingston Collegiate Vocational Institute, KCVI. It represents, a lot of its value is in association. It represents the history and inception of secondary school education in Ontario. KCVI can trace its roots back to 1786, when it was established by the Reverend John Stewart as the first secondary school in Ontario. The earliest building, which is in the top left of your screen, a portion of the building on this property is from 1911. And as Dr. Bray mentioned, there were additions done in the 30s, 50s, and 60s, and even more recently. This building has extensive associative value, not only with Reverend Stewart and the history of secondary education, but also with well-known architects who involved in this building, Joseph Power and Colin Drever. It also has a long list of influential alumni coming out of this facility, including members of federal and provincial parliament, former city mayors, as well as members of the Kingston rock band, the Tragically Hip, and soloist David Usher. The full statement is in your agenda package, and I will take a quick moment here just to speak on a couple of points that Dr. Bray brought up. The matter of chattel versus attributes under the Heritage Act. There was a recent case, which I'll try to find and circulate to this committee. I believe it was in St. Mary's, Ontario, that was processed through the Conservation Review Board, where it was determined in that case, I think it was actually a well-known and large clock that was attached to the wall. The community wanted to add it as an attribute. The board made the ruling that because it's a removable object from the building, it is considered chattel, and the Heritage Act doesn't allow chattel to be included as a heritage attribute. So there are some features in this building that, while extremely significant to the history of this building, unfortunately can't be included in this bylaw. So that leads me to the question of intangible attributes. And while Dr. Bray referred to the Heritage Act as broad, you may also want to call it vague. And it's been our practice that intangible, the history, the story of these buildings is included in the cultural, the statement of cultural heritage significance in the bylaw. So the write-up that's in Appendix B of your report is where those stories belong, is under the legislation. The attributes are essentially those things, so they're the actual tangible things in the property that relay and are part of why it has value, and they're the things that we can control, and that's why, and protect. So those are why they're listed specifically. The stories and whatnot is difficult to sort of control from a legislative implemented procedures or process. So that's why they're not included. Some of my counterparts would include more intangible attributes, but I think that's how we interpret it, is that you can put them in there. They're pretty. They maybe tell the story, but there's really, from a functional and from an implementation perspective, they're hard to implement and hard to control. So that's why they were left out in this particular case. And I should also mention this bylaw we have been working on for a number of years now and have met extensively with the school board, and they, while I think they still have some reservations about this, they have assured us that they're not objecting to it at this point. So we have reached a point where the owner is satisfied with this bylaw, and that's, I think, a big success in this case. So we'd like to proceed as per the package. So moving on, the next property is a landmark out on Front Road. It's the Wortman Farmhouse. It's a 2-story Italianate brick building. It displays, it was built around 1860 and displays high degree of craftsmanship with its fine brickwork. It's Flemish bond brickwork on the front facade. and the roof and such attributes. It also has associative value with the United Empire Loyalist family, the Wortmans, who farmed this land for over 100 years. And these owners have confirmed to us that they have no concerns with the designation. This is the Prentice Street United Church. It has direct association with the history of Methodist and United Church in Kingston. It's the current sanctuary. It was built in the Collegiate Gothic style in 1931 by well-known local architect Colin Drever, and it displays high-quality craftsmanship in its Tudor arches and sanctuary ceiling, and is a landmark in Williamsville. Next door to this property is the Prentice Street United Church Manse, which is a 2.5-story Edwardian-style building. It was built in 1907. It was originally built as the manse for the former Methodist Church from 1884 that was removed. And it again has direct history with the Methodist and United Churches in Kingston. We have met with the owners of these two properties, and while I believe they still have some reservations on this designation, they too have noted no objection. This property is at 946 Old Kingston Mills Road. It is the Holy Name of Jesus Roman Catholic Church. It is a Gothic revival church built in 1887 out of sandstone, which is kind of interesting for Kingston, and includes locally sourced limestone detailing. Again, this displays exceptional craftsmanship, and it attached to the main building by a 1-story sandstone addition is a brick Victorian-era rectory building. And this is built by well-known ecclesiastical architect Joseph Conley. And this, we have met with the representatives of the Roman Catholic Church, and they've noted no objection to this designation. This property is at 3702 Highway 38. It's the Merville Wesleyan Methodist Church. It's a Gothic revival church in limestone, built in 1871. Again, it has associative value with the Merville and Methodist Church history in the area, and it's a landmark in this community. The owners, again, I believe have reservations regarding this designation, but don't appear to object to the designation. This property is at 3581 Princess Street in Westbrook. This is the Westbrook Wesleyan Methodist Church. It's, again, a evenly coursed limestone Gothic revival church. And it is built in 1860, and it's a landmark in the village. It has direct association with brothers Hugh and William Saul, who built a number of stone buildings in Westbrook, and also with Justice of the Peace William Marshall, who donated the lands for this church and reportedly suggested the name Westbrook for this community. And that statement is in your agenda package, and the owners, I understand, continue to have concerns with this designation. This is 1216 Unity Road, the former Glen Burnie Methodist Church. It includes a limestone building built in 1857, as well as a well-designed hall addition built in 1957 by well-known architect Wilfred Sorensen. Again, this is a landmark in this community, and it has a direct association with the history of Methodist Church in this area, and we've received support for this application, for this designation. And finally, this is the Kepler Methodist Episcopal Church on Kepler Road. It is a Gothic revival red brick church from 1878. It has association with the Powley family, who were UEL's early settlers in this area, and with the history of the community of Kepler, which I have come to discover is quite a cute little community I didn't know even existed. And this is a landmark in that community because it does really stand out on a street corner. And these owners have also confirmed no concerns with the designation. So all of these bylaws have been reviewed by the Historic Properties Working Group, who support the designation. And as I noted earlier, the bylaws, or the evaluation satisfies the prescribed criteria under the Heritage Act. And we recommend, or we request that Heritage Kingston recommend to Council to direct staff to serve a notice of intention to designate on these properties, and should we have no objection within the 30-day appeal period, that Council advance the designation bylaws.
Thank you, Ryan. So as with all designations, there's the clause about the 30-day, and then there's the clause that describes the property, and it's all one recommendation with 18 clauses. That's what we're going to discuss. Normally we would have questions from members of the committee to staff at this point, but questions only. Go, Mac.
Did I hear you right that there was only the one property that the people were objecting to it?
Mr. Chair, we've had extensive conversations with each of these property owners, and I think for the most part, while I think they have some reservations, there was just the one that I don't think has come around to actually supporting it. So I would say yes, I believe they still have an objection, and that was the Westbrook Church.
And just refresh my memory, so whether they have reservations or not, are we still allowed to go ahead with it? I believe so, eh? Yeah.
That's right. The municipality can designate with or without the current owner's approval. Any other questions? Yes, Paul.
Two things. The Holy Name of Jesus Roman Catholic Church, does that include the manse beside it, or is it just the limestone attached? And then I have one other question. Okay.
And ask all your questions.
Okay. And then KCVI, Dr. Bray was talking about internal versus external. The auditorium, and there's a shooting range because there used to be an Army Cadet unit there in the basement. Do we have the ability to designate stuff internally that's not attached, that's not chattel at this, to make sure certain attributes are taken care of, or is it only an external, like he was saying? I was a little confused with that part.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start with the last question first, and that's the including of internal features. That is part of that broadness of the Heritage Act. We do have the legal ability to designate interior features. We have in the past, and actually the Princess Street United Church has some interior features that we've suggested as attributes. I don't know if I should speak for all of us. My opinion, as far as internal features goes, has always been if the public can't appreciate the interior feature, can't take a benefit from it, then it has no place in a publicly designated bylaw. So in this particular case, if this property, I guess, changes out of the school board hands into private hands, that space would be private space. And while the auditorium is an interesting feature on that property and probably should be conserved, I'm not sure it's the place of the city to say that in this particular case. So it's been my opinion to leave those type of features out, unless in the case of a church or a publicly accessible building like this one, the public can appreciate those. So traditionally we leave out interior features unless there is that public accessibility. As far as the first question, can I ask which property you were asking about? I sort of missed the topic matter of which.
It's the Roman Catholic Church.
Oh, yes.
And I want to respond.
Yes, the rectory is included. The small or the big brick building there to the left of your screen. It is one of the attributes, yes.
How do you know that the KCVI will become not a public entity? Because there is a public institution that is next door to that could possibly continue to be a public entity, that building. So should we not look at that ahead just in case? And I may have to clear a conflict of interest. I just thought of that.
The point would be the same if the Catholic School Board, for example, came forward and expressed interest in the site as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, it's a good point. I mean, it could go into public ownership or another publicly established entity. So it just has been the practice of the city not to designate interior attributes, despite the fact that there are properties throughout the city, some of which are owned by institutions that have interior designated attributes. One thing I will say is we have worked quite closely with the Limestone District School Board on the designation of this property. There's been a lot of discussions in behind the scenes, as with all of these. Ryan and I are going and sitting down with people at their kitchen tables or wherever the case may be, and the idea of adding interior attributes to this bylaw has not been discussed. I would be somewhat reluctant to add it. I'll leave that to the discretion of the committee, but it hasn't been discussed to date, so.
Thank you. So we're still at questions. We will have a chance to debate this in a moment. Any other questions? Okay, so members of the public, seeing none. We need a mover and a seconder for the entire recommendation. To get it on the floor, moved by Mac, seconded by Don, keeping an eye on the clock. Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to address one aspect.
I'll take the chair.
Thank you. So KCVI is in my district, so I'm addressing as Sydenham councillor. Regarding the auditorium, I mean, all of the significant events that I've attended at KCVI were in the auditorium, so to me I have a strong association in my mind, and so do all of my residents with the auditorium. I don't think anyone in Sydenham would disagree with the historical nature of it. However, it is also a really nice auditorium with nice seats and a great stage and a curtain and everything. And that has value, inherent value, aside from the historical value. So to me, and in fact, that value the value to the new owner, unless they have no need for anything like a stage or an auditorium, would remain, and so it's got inherent protection in its own merit. And whenever that's the case, I think that's great, because then you don't need to get bogged down in the debate over whether or not it should be protected with extra measures, because it probably will protect itself. So if forced to weigh in on it at council, because staff, without the blessing of the current owners, who will be the sellers and who get to decide who to sell to, we add more complication to the problem. So I think if they've been approached about the current bylaw and are not planning to object to it, that's very significant, so we should keep that in mind. But I agree with the basic premise that the auditorium should be preserved. I just don't know whether it's worth fighting about or jeopardizing the consent that we already have from the school board, seeing that it has its own inherent value. Thank you.
Chair.
Okay, so who else would like to comment before we vote on these designations? Yes, Don.
Well, just to comment, it's great to see a large number of important properties being designated in this way. Unfortunately, designating doesn't mean protecting. There's a lot more has to go on to ensure that protection happens, and that needs the vigilance of this committee and staff and so on. And this, we are aware, I think, of a property, 488 Division Street, that we just designated last year, mentioning the log house addition in the rear with the visible logs, and as a heritage attribute, and that property was sold and the log house was demolished. So that's, those kinds of things happen. I think it's important that when they happen, some action follows that sends a message to owners and citizens that they have to respect designations.
It's a good point. It's not ironclad protection by any means, and more consequences for ignoring the designations would strengthen the designations. Thank you. Sherman?
I just want to put forward something that I brought forward at the property group, and that was a suggestion that there be some sort of acknowledgement, whether it's a package, I think a package that goes to the new property owner or the owner newly designated, that really outlines how the city, how the community does support the owner to take responsibility for the the significance of the property, and I would encourage staff to really move forward on the create the package, welcome home, whatever it is, a package that supports this, that suggests that the city, the community does support through the grant program, through the whatever programs, through this committee, the preservation of these spaces. And I think that should be part and parcel part of the approval of this process to also increase its viability through the creation of a support system that encourages the not the restoration, the maintenance, maintenance of this significant feature or property.
Thank you, Sherman. Any other debate or comments? Okay, so we're going to vote on the entire recommendation, all 18 clauses. Moved and seconded. You've got the mover and seconder? Yeah. Okay. Seeing no further comments, all those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. And congratulations for 9 more designations, and look forward to coming to council. We're almost done. We're almost at the finish line. The next item is working group reports and, which is it? Heritage? So the third spot there are 3 reports, but there's actionable items in the third one, so we'll go right to that one. Do we need to accept we need to accept the first 2 though, right? Or we do them all? Okay, we're going to vote on all 3, reading all 3 working group reports for the record. We're going to do that at the end, but I understand Dr. Campbell wanted to tell us something about some of the reports.
Sorry, just for clarification, James, am I to speak to all reports at once?
You can speak to the cultural and heritage assets ones if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. So the Cultural Heritage Working Group report, or the Heritage Assets report, I should say, we've seen ones like this before. It basically is bringing a number of acquisitions to the city's collection, brought to this committee then as a recommendation onto council. The objects represented in the report, or the working group notes, speak to the history, of course, of the city of Kingston and supplement the civic collection. A number of the items come to us through past mayors, aldermen, and kind of speak to the evolution of the amalgamated city of Kingston. And so they actually do quite nicely supplement our existing collection. I did just also want to point out for this committee that the next time you receive motions in this nature, they're going to come to you as an independent report. And so they will be moved into the business of the committee. So we didn't want to cloud that scenario because we do have an additional piece that will be moving next meeting in that report process. But we didn't want to do that at both times in the same meeting, to have it in notes and then as well as a report. So if there are questions about any of the objects, I'm happy to answer them.
So if I understand correctly, maybe confirm, James, I've always wondered about these 3 placeholder items under 8A, B, and C. Is that where this potentially go in the future?
Yes, so moving forward, if there's any additional assets which are considered to add to the city collection, which there obviously will be, it'll be dealt with under business item A or C, depending on what it is.
Right, so business item 8A, cultural heritage, business item 8C, heritage assets. If there's actionable items, they should probably go there under business, because it is business. But for today only, we will consider the recommendations that are in the Heritage Asset Working Group notes, which start on page 115, right near the end of the package. So, and we'll do those right now, and then when we're done with those, we will vote on receiving all 3 working group reports. So, so these are individual recommendations we're to consider. The first one is that Heritage Kingston recommend council to accept the Frey collection owned by Bob Frey for the civic collection. Do we need a separate motion for each? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read them all out. If anyone wants any of them separated because they want to comment or ask a question, then raise your hand. Otherwise, we will vote on all the recommendations as one item. So I've read the first one. The second one is that Heritage Kingston recommend council accept the presentation tankard and the election advertising card found in collections for the Civic Collection. The third one is that Heritage Kingston recommend to council to accept this collection of materials connected with the Salvation Army in Kingston, currently owned by Lydia McPherson for the Civic Collection. The fourth one is we already own. It is the recommendation that Heritage Kingston recommend council to accept the Sir John A. Macdonald bicentennial pins owned by the City of Kingston for the Civic Collection. And there's two more. That Heritage Kingston recommend council to accept the final selection of documents and photographs from this group for the Civic Collection. That's the assorted city documents from 60s to 90s. And the last one is that Heritage Kingston recommend to council to accept the golden leaves from Canada's past owned by the City of Kingston for the Civic Collection. I just have a question so we can get it straight in our minds. I don't sit on this working group. The things that we already own, are they just in storage, and then by moving them to collections they would go through the rotation of display and that kind of thing? Is that the difference?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So objects that the city has right now within its kind of administrative documentation, often organized via clerks into our archives for the city's essential operations. Objects like that don't fall under the same protection guidelines and criteria as objects that are held in the Civic Collection specifically. So we are basically proposing when we move objects that we already own, we're offering them an extra layer essentially of protection. They would then become Civic Collection artifacts and would be warranted and allowed all of the treatment and conservation associated with that process. So things that might exist in our paper archives that could be susceptible to damage or deterioration, this is basically us saying these are weighted significantly to the point that we would want to protect them through acts of conservation if necessary and ensure that their storage is appropriate given their condition.
And if cultural heritage staff found that there was an aspect of the collection, an item in the collection that was no longer of any value, would the reverse sometimes happen?
Thank you, and through you, absolutely. So that process is called deaccessioning. We're actually undergoing, just for the update to the committee here, we're purchasing new software to allow us outside of the regulated software used by the corporation to track documents called TRIM. We're actually purchasing collection-specific software right now, and once we have that, we'll be putting all of our collection into that software, and in that process, we fully anticipate that this committee will start to receive requests to deaccession, which would be objects that we have reevaluated and considered in our mandate and would then remove from the collection because they don't warrant the attention, care, and conservation as per the mandates of our collection policy.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee before we move and second the recommendation? Okay, we need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Sherman, seconded by Catherine, that all 6 of those recommendations, we would, they basically all say recommend to council to accept. So with the one motion, we would be recommending all 6. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you. Now we need a motion to accept the 3 working group reports for the record. Moved by Don, seconded by Councillor Schell. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Any motions? No. Notices of motion? The item that Don suggests for other business is coming back in the form of an actionable item when the bylaw is complete. As mentioned earlier, there is no correspondence. Our next meeting, just to highlight this, we meet the 3rd Wednesday for the next 6 months, or until further notice. The next meeting is November 15th at 9:30. I think that's 3 weeks away. And need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Mac, second by Don. All those in favor? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for coming in.